Hi, Professor Pena. My name is Jordan Brown, and this is going to be my Trace the Path presentation. As requested, I selected a offense that is applicable to both juveniles and adults. It's not a status offense. The offense that I chose is, let me get this so you can see it, assault and battery. Assault is defined, these come from the Michigan legislature too. Assault is defined as the unlawful act or threat of action. Battery is defined as the intentional infliction of violence or force against another person. So for my scenarios, we're just going to have basically two fights that occur. For the juvenile scenario, it'll be a high schooler. We'll call him Johnny for the sake of this presentation. And he basically gets in a fight. He threatens another student for talking bad about his girlfriend. The incident escalates into a fist fight and ends up with Johnny punching the student in the face several times before teachers break it up. And we'll say that the student is hurt pretty bad since since he would go to court for it. And same scenario for adult, we'll call him Frank. He threatens a man at the bar and then punches him several times in the face for making lewd comments about his girlfriend. The bouncers eventually will break up the fight, and both will be arrested for their actions. Arrest is going to occur for juveniles. Sometimes they say taken into custody. It's one of the ways that they try to decriminalize the whole juvenile justice system. There's a lot of different terminology that's used, and it just makes it sound less threatening. But they will both be arrested, and Johnny, police can choose to release the minor or deliver him to a juvenile detention facility. He could be released to his parent or guardian on the promise that they will bring him to court for his hearing. That's kind of like the bond for a juvenile, I guess. Frank would remain in a city or county jail while awaiting trial. Frank can post bail or bond, but Johnny cannot. That's one of the differences between a juvenile and adult when they're taken into custody. There's a few other differences as well. Some similarities, though, is that they are both given Miranda rights. They both have a right to witness testimony, and they both have a right against self-incrimination. Frank has a right to a jury trial, but in most states, Johnny will not. That's one of the constitutional rights that juveniles are not afforded in the juvenile justice system. And as I mentioned, Johnny's parent or guardian must be notified. Frank's clearly doesn't have to be because he's an adult. In the court process, this is more of the different terminology that's used. Petition would be used to bring a juvenile to court. It's similar to a complaint for an adult. Detention hearing would take place. That's similar to a bail hearing or bond hearing for an adult. In the juvenile system, there's a pretrial or settlement conference. The case could be ended here. The juvenile could be diverted and just be given intermediate sanctions, and not go through with the incarceration process or the trial. The actual trial is called an adjudication hearing in juvie, and it's similar to an adult criminal trial. Disposition is basically another word for sentencing that is used in juvenile court, and there's numerous dispositions or sentences that a juvenile can face as a result of a crime such as this. Johnny's trial will likely take place in front of a judge as a bench trial. Frank's obviously would be a jury trial. Juvenile court attorneys, as we mentioned, everyone is there for the best interests of the juvenile, so they tend to agree on the best course of action to take. That's very different than adult court. They usually have different sentencing options. Adult court would be very different if the defense attorney and prosecutor always agreed on the sentencing to take. And juvenile court is rarely open to the public, while adult court is open to the public in most cases. And as we've stated throughout the course, juvenile court is more informal. The proceedings are more informal as opposed to adult court, which is much more formal. And as I said, Johnny could be waived to adult court by the judge, a judicial waiver, a prosecutor, direct file, or from himself. He could put in a request for that. And there's obviously some states that we talked about where there's a certain age for a certain crime and you automatically go to adult court. But I don't think that would be the case for assault and battery. This is a couple graphs I put together to try and illustrate the different goals of each justice system. For juvenile court, it's clearly much more focused on rehabilitation and deterrence as opposed to punishment and incapacitation. Those are important as well, don't get me wrong. We do want to still punish individuals for the things that they do, But when it's young people, we mostly want to rehabilitate them since they still have a chance, more of a chance to be rehabilitated than an adult would. I have one specific study from the Rochester Medical Center. It says that the rational part of the brain is really not fully developed until 25 or so. Some studies even say that it's even later in life than that, up until 30 or so. So a 16-year-old kid who gets arrested for a crime has much more time to change his ways as opposed to someone who's fully developed. So that's why rehabilitation and deterrence is so important in the juvenile justice system. In the adult court, this is just my opinion. Some people might put those in different order, but it seems to be more geared towards punishment and incapacitation to prevent them from being out in society and committing crimes, and deterrence and reformation or rehabilitation seems to be later on down the line when it comes to rehabilitating adults. And the dispositions and sentencings differ for adults and juveniles. Obviously, there's much more sentences that a juvenile can get as opposed to an adult. Johnny could end up with just a verbal warning from a judge, like a reprimand. He could end up with a fine, community service, a tether, probation. He could end up in juvenile detention. Counseling may be offered, therapy, a boot camp, house arrest, or the day reporting centers that we've talked about frequently. This would allow him to remain in school or to remain working and still get the services that he needs and the help that he needs to prevent, whatever underlying issue it is that causes him to get into fights. And for someone like Frank, he would likely be fined, maybe face incarceration in prison, possibly probation, parole, and he might be required to take some anger management classes, maybe substance abuse if alcohol was involved. I'm going to be talking about the ethical dilemmas. There are numerous dilemmas that face the juvenile justice and adult system. The death penalty was obviously prohibited for minors in 2005, so that was seen as something that was unethical for juveniles to be killed with capital punishment. Another issue that is up frequently is life without parole. Is it fair to put a young person away for their entire life for a crime that they commit when they're young? That's still a hot debate. Is it fair to transfer juveniles to adult court and try them as adults? I know there's some countries that will not do that, mostly like Norway and those kind of Scandinavian countries. Retribution versus rehabilitation. Obviously, I already talked about where our priorities, what should our priorities be, and then incarceration of young people. Some of the worry is that if we put young people into an adult prison, will they become worse? Because that is a common saying, is that people who go to prison end up becoming better criminals in prison. It's almost like a college sometimes for criminals, and they become better at their criminal enterprise once they exit. And then obviously mental health. There's a lot of mentally ill people that are incarcerated because all the mental health facilities are being closed down. So there's numerous dilemmas that we still face, and a lot of these debates are continuing to go on and probably will continue to go on for quite a long time. And that pretty much sums it up for my presentation. Those are my references. Thank you and have a good week.